what goes into the production of a documentary like this? You said that you had connections, but it's still got to be such a massive undertaking to find these people and figure out the stories. What were some of the stories that kind of stand out to you?
Oh man, boy, I wish I had thought about that for a few minutes. There's just so many stories. I mean, there were, one of the bigger ones that very few people know about, and we kind of touched upon it in the trailer for the Kickstarter, was at one point, a lot of you may not remember this, but this around the mid-90s, like early to mid-90s, the arcade was the king of video games. Home games were, obviously there were Nintendo's out and PlayStation 1 was out, but the arcades were at the top of the food chain. And so there was a lot of money to be made in arcades. And so Midway was doing really well, but there were a lot of other companies that were trying to compete against them. And DreamWorks had more or less just formed at that time. And one part of DreamWorks that they really wanted to build up was the games division.
Of course, that makes sense.
So this was right, I know, exactly.
No, I follow you.
So what ended up happening was DreamWorks' top people, and we're talking about like Katzenberg and Spielberg, they basically tried to steal away all the senior and lead people from Midway to form an arcade company. And so there were times where the middle management of our company, they would just disappear for days on end.
Like what happened? Steven Spielberg kidnapped.
Yeah, no, it almost is, because they were flying flying Spielberg's personal jet to pick them up at O'Hare to take them to LA to try to wine and dine them. So stuff like that was happening all the time.
I just imagine like Steven Spielberg, not content to have just directed Hook, was like, I need to make this into a mashing fighting game.
Yep, exactly. But here's the great one. That's kind of related to that. There was such a big, after Mortal Kombat 2 especially, there was so much hype about fighting games, especially in the arcades. And so the writer of Back to the Future, Bob Gale, somehow he got it into his head that he wanted to produce a fighting game for the arcade. So he made this game called Tattoo Assassins. I don't know if anyone heard of that, but it was tested here in Chicago at some of the arcades that we tested, because there's such a huge fighting game community here in this town. And they put out this game, and they spent probably 5 to 10 times the budget of Mortal Kombat back then, and it was one of the worst fighting games ever. But it was just because Bob Gale's name was all over it. Like, they were just throwing money into it like crazy.
Well, one of the things that I'm able to glean from a lot of the interviews that you sent me in the trailer is that the vibe was like, well, let's just do it. Like, we just want to do this thing. Let's just put it in the game.
Yeah.
And hearing the creators talk about how, well, we put Easter eggs in there just to kind of goat people and see what happened. And what I think is interesting is that's kind of carried over. Like, those Easter eggs are now actually in Mortal Kombat 9 and Mortal Kombat 10. Like, Rain and Ermac are now actual fighters, and that all started when you were there.
Yeah. It's interesting. Not saying like the good old days were always great or anything like that, but one of the fun things about game development back then for a large company was that the teams were pretty small. We were left pretty much alone.
How many people were on your teams?
So, I mean, the first game I ever worked on was WrestleMania, the arcade game, and that was...
That's a great game.
Wow.
I was a huge Shawn Michaels and someone else fan.
Yeah.
And that would be the game that my parents would go bowl and be like, here's a quarter or 5, and I would just disappear.
Yeah, it was just a stupid, fun, arcade-style wrestling game, and but that team, it was 4 people, maybe 5 at most at the time.
So that's crazy.
Yeah. So, and the crazy thing about it was, and this is the way the arcade business was back then, was they would tell us, here's the budget for your game, here's whatever it's gonna be fighting games, it's gonna be driving game, whatever. It's due on this date, and then we'll see you when it's done. So we literally did not have producers. We didn't have anybody. It was every person that was on the team did multiple jobs, and then we made the game, it goes out to the arcades, and then the salespeople sell it, and everyone high fives and thinks they're all geniuses.
Yes, the 90s.
Yeah, exactly.
Bill Clinton was in office, and we all high fived.
Exactly.